This is the Stephen Mansfield Podcast.
I want to thank you for joining me on this podcast. If you are a regular listener to either of my podcasts, the Stephen Mansfield Podcast or the Great Man Podcast, then you know I have not begun with my traditional openings, the little statements and welcomes that symbolize or indicate what podcast we're talking about. And that is because I am doing something I rarely do. And I am doing one podcast this time for both of my podcasts, one recording for both the Stephen Mansfield Podcast and the Great Man Podcast. And the reason is that I would like in this podcast to remember Charlie Kirk. And I want to caution those of you who might be a little bit reactionary that you don't know what I'm going to say. You don't know what my perspective is going to be. So just because I'm a Christian and a political conservative, slightly right of center, don't assume. Listen and let me honor this man and remember this man and comment about this man in a way that I think will be compelling to you. September 10th, 2025. I believe that is a day that is going to live in our history, not like December 7th, 1941 or November 22nd, 1963, but it's going to live in our history. It's going to be a watershed day, a dividing point. On that day, I was at the Park Royal Hotel in Rochester, Michigan, just outside of Detroit, doing an event. Turned on my television during the day, which is rare for me. I rarely have the television going during the day. And on one of the news networks, they broke in and said that Charlie had been shot. I then made what might have been a mistake, going online looking for more news, and ended up seeing the extremely graphic video of Charlie being shot. I was fairly sure, though I am no expert. I am not an MD. I am not a medical professional. I'm not an expert in firearms. I was fairly sure that Charlie was going to die. And though it took us, I think, a better part of an hour to hear for sure, I was fairly sure that was over. It happened on a university campus in Utah. It happened in front of thousands of what I think are largely college students, not exclusively. And, of course, the reaction over the next days was fascinating. So I would like to talk about him. I'd like to talk about the circumstances around his shooting a little bit. I'd like to talk about the implications of his life. I'd like to talk about where I think he was unwise and flawed. I'd like to talk about where I think he was played a bit by strong interests. And I'd like to remember him as a man, which is why I am doing this podcast for our Great Man Podcast also. I'll keep it brief, I hope, and I will be, I hope, applicable to both of my podcast audiences. I love you, and I'm glad you're here. I was not a close friend of Charlie Kirk's. I did know him. We had met. We knew each other, as you tend to do when you are operating in the same broad philosophical space and you center around D.C. Liked each other, kind, polite to each other. That was it. We were not close friends, and I dislike it intently when people claim to be very, very close to those who are getting a lot of media attention. I wasn't. I admired him because I knew his story a bit. I liked the fact that he was very young. I like the fact that in his early days, he was smart and well-studied and well-read. He applied to the United States Military Academy and did not get in. He went to Harper College and only stayed for a semester. I think he had something burning in his soul. I like people like this. He wanted to make a difference. He found college sleepy. He didn't find it as exciting as the reading of conservative great minds that he had immersed himself in. And so he left college. In fact, as far as I know, he never finished college, never had but one semester of college, and yet he was a sharp mind. By the way, many people do that. I'm not leading some movement against going to college, going to universities. Many of us need to go. I certainly did. But Charlie went for one semester. And so like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and others who went to school for a short while and up and left and went on to accomplish great things, Charlie's in that mold. He had a good mind. He was sharp. He was articulate. He was tall. He was good looking. And he began to have an impact. He came along at a time when there was a great need for conservative youth, for people to be articulate, for people to be wise and smart. And a lot of organizations were started involving him. A lot of them didn't work. Some of them with Jerry Falwell Jr. Kirk was the name of the organization. They tried to start a hybrid of Falwell and Kirk in the name, but it didn't work. And ultimately, he started Turning Point. I liked him very much because he was a strong and unapologetic Christian apologist. He was smart in the way that he did it. He didn't go overly academic. He didn't reach into ancient Hebrew and obscure facts. He just simply pretty much convinced people about the strength of the gospel, knowing some things about the original documents and knowing the power of the story and knowing what Christianity had produced in history and helping people confront the inconsistencies and the murkiness of their own thinking. I thought he did it well. I thought he did it powerfully. I also liked the fact that he was a conservative, and that meant he was somewhat right of center. I think he was pushed a little bit further hard right and maybe MAGA, but the bottom line is that he was smart and a gifted apologist for a conservative traditional values kind of politic, which is where I am. I'm more slightly right of center. He was a little further right, but that's fine. I liked him. I admired him. I liked the way he was. Most of all, I think I admired his courage. I think that Charlie was a man who had both courage and compassion at the same time. In fact, what really touched me was that he decided, now Charlie could have made a lot of money working for the think tanks and becoming the best boy of a bunch of leading politicians, but what did he decide to do? He decided to go to the university campuses. He decided to speak. He decided to sit out in the hot sun and have people flipping him the bird and calling him names and effing him off and all of that kind of thing that I'm sure you've seen online. He knew he would. He knew the colleges are roiling and angry, and he knew that they weren't largely conservative, but he also knew they were the future. And so he decided to focus primarily on college campuses. It meant that he was going to be threatened. It meant that he was going to be insulted. It meant that he was going to have things thrown at him. It meant that he was going to be dealing with some rather silly thinking. College students are, by definition, still forming their worldview, and they tend to have more emotion than they do thought. Not all of them, I bet, but certainly many. And he was going to be having all of this thrown at him. And so I admired that. There were times that I winced at what he said. I'll tell you about that in a minute. There were times that I was concerned. There were times I could tell the handprints of powerful interests on what he was saying, and that I could tell he was wrestling with that a bit. We learned that is true as we hear more about him here after his death. But these things concerned me. But I thought about going and sitting with him and trying to convince him of a few things, but that just never happened. And so I just want to say in general, I admired him, admired his courage, grateful that he was in the world, glad that he had the courage to go to the college campuses and that he cared about youth like I do. I think you change the campus, you change the world. Charlie obviously believed the same thing. Like I say, he could have been a very wealthy man had he gone a different direction. A lot of people would have been happy to have somebody like him speaking as the front man for organizations they could start, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Charlie started his own organization, stayed out of some other organizations, and went to the university campuses and lived basically on donations. And I think that was the smart way to go. I'm not going to comment too extensively on his assassination, on the shooting of Charlie Kirk. There are things I do not understand about that. I was grieved by what I saw as I learned of the shooting, and then went and just stumbled on the videos online that I'm sure all of you have seen. It was a skilled shot, but not excessively so. It was approximately 2 football fields in length, which sounds like a long distance for people who aren't experienced with guns. I'm not. But I do hang with, military snipers and hunters and people who build guns and all kinds of things, and they tell me their lore. So I always get in trouble when I talk about the technicalities of guns on my podcast. But I was sitting with military people when I learned about this, or shortly after I learned about this, in my hotel room. And they said that they train U.S. Army shooters to shoot at 180 yards. Well, that's approximately 600 feet. That's approximately how far this shot was. So it's not that outlandish of a shot, but it was dang near perfect. It went through the jugular, and we understand, although of course we don't have the coroner's report yet, but we understand that it snapped his neck. which is why you see him freeze in the position that he did, fall off his stool, and most likely within seconds he was dead because the brain would have been dead. He may have still had a heartbeat, but the brain would have been dead. If you saw these horrible videos, you saw the amount of blood he was losing. And, of course, all that blood meant for the brain, draining from the brain. And Charlie did not live long afterwards. So I don't think that all the facts are in about the shooting, and I don't want to focus too much on that. I'm sorry for those who were traumatized by it. I'm sorry for those who were endangered by it. I'm sorry that this happened on a university campus. I'm sorry that so many had to witness it. I'm sorry that I had to see it and others had to see these very clear iPhone videos from 30 feet away. But I'm glad that I saw how my friend Charlie came to an end, and that if he was going to endure that, I'm glad that I was able to at least witness it from a distance. I have a thing that I do that will bother some of you whenever I find that someone has been beheaded by ISIS or Hamas or something like that, and I know the videos online. I go and I watch it. And the reason I watch it is not that I have some bloody macabre interest, but because I feel like I'm with these people compassionately with them at the end. They endured it. I want to endure it as best I can with them. I feel like I'm honoring them. So that may be weird to some of you. It may just sound like I'm being bloody. It's not. But I watched it several times, saw the close-up videos of Charlie being shot. And so we'll continue to have stirrings and investigations and what have you. I'm very intrigued by the radicalization of the shooter, whose name I don't want to say on the air, in a conservative area, quite frankly, a Mormon area, which is conservative on stun. If you've read my book on Mormonism, you know that I don't believe their supernatural claims, but I do honor them as American patriots and for what they've accomplished in history. And so if you're living in a Mormon enclave, you're living amongst patriots, you're living among conservatives. And the shooter was part of that culture, but largely through social media and the influence of university professors migrated away from it. We're learning that he was living with a trans person. We're learning that he had moved angrily away from Christian moorings, religious moorings, conservative moorings, and that if he is indeed the shooter, that he decided to kill Charlie Kirk because he was a purveyor of hate. That's what we are told. Don't know more about that. Don't want to spread rumors. Not sure the investigation has surfaced everything it should, but a sadness to me. I want to celebrate Charlie Kirk as a man, and first of all, for his courage. I've said it repeatedly, but to be young, to not be a college graduate, to go out into the world, speak what you believe, and get on as broad a stage as possible, help shape presidential elections, speak courageously for both your faith and your politics. I admire someone like this. I admire that he put himself in harm's way. I admire that he put himself in the intellectual line of fire now by what I'm saying. I admire that. He obviously was going to come up against, intellectuals and PhDs and university peoples who would go after him. Intellectuals like nothing more than going after you because you don't have the proper credentials. How dare you speak? You're only a high school graduate. I'm sure he heard that time and again. But he was smart and he was humorous and he was compassionate and he was again, I just want to say courageous. So I commend Charlie Kirk for being courageous. I also commend him for something that I value very much in American history. I know it's a practice in other parts of the world too, but it's a unique theme in American history, and that is his passion for self-education. Again, a high school graduate with only one semester of college, but he read and he read and he read and he digested and he rearticulated and he reworked material in his mind and expressed it in palatable ways that youth would understand. And I admire that. The people I admire most in the world are people of self-education, Churchill and Truman, and I could go on with people, obviously Booker T. Washington and Harriet. I could just go on and on with the list of people that I admire, that I've written about, who rose largely on the wings of a passion for self-education. They read, they learned, they got the right books, the good books, they digested them, they learned, they debated with friends late at night over pizza, they digested, they rolled the facts around when they were on the bus or the plane, and then they acted on them and articulated them. I love it. I admire it. I think it's one of the skills of men, great men in particular, of course women too. I'm just at this moment speaking of manhood. I've written about self-education. in a number of my books, admire it immensely, and Charlie was an exemplar of it. I'm a big believer in it. He also had a great capacity for friendship. He had a big white tooth smile, and he was tall, and he was gregarious, and he was muscular and energetic and gangly, and he had a gift for friendship. People liked him. People admired him. He welcomed people. He even made friends. You can see him online on YouTube making friends with people who came up to criticize him. I like the gift of friendship. I like the idea of relational connecting. I like people who can stay friends with people they intellectually disagree with. We've got a snot-nosed, up-your-own-backside kind of society these days. If I disagree with you about one small thing, I can't hang with you, and in fact, I've got to go somewhere else and criticize you. Well, I think that's crap. I don't have a friend I don't disagree with about something. As I often say when I'm making speeches in rooms, conducting seminars and whatever, if we all have to agree, we're in trouble. Because you take a typical room, let's say 300 people in a room, if I ask enough questions, if these people talk long enough, they're going to find something each one of them believes that nobody else does. Nobody else in the room believes. And so what does that mean? We can never be in a room together again? That's ridiculous. I'm part of churches. I'm part of Christian ministry movements. I'm part of intellectual organizations. I'm part of groups in D.C. I work with people. I work with the Kurds, with whom I largely disagree. They're Muslim. I'm Christian, but I love them. We obviously have disagreements. We obviously disagree. We don't even, they have to work towards understanding my English because I don't speak the Kurdish languages. You understand what I'm saying? There's lots that separates us, and yet you can be in common cause with people and build friendship. And I think the Kurds have a great gift for friendship. Charlie Kirk certainly did, and I admired it greatly. I could tell if I'd had more meetings with him, which we never pursued, and it's not an agenda of mine to tackle somebody and make them my friend. But we would have had a lot of fun together, even though he's half my age. And I like the fact, even though people won't think of him in these terms because he was strident and could be bombastic, I like the fact that he was a servant. Why is he sitting in the heat at a university campus? Because he wants to serve the next generation with new thought and challenging them to be better and calling them out to be their best and calling them to take hold of God. There's a servant aspect to this. It wasn't going to make him a lot of money sitting at what it was at Utah Valley University, talking to students in the heat. That wasn't going to make him a lot of money. He wasn't going to you don't make money off of university students, but you serve them. You change their mind. You shape the future. You help them. You help them work through their murky thinking and what they've picked up from bad news stories and bad books and maybe worse professors. Not that all professors are bad, not at all. Admire them deeply, love that profession, but for heaven's sake, some of the craziest things in our generation are coming out of the universities from tenured professors. So I liked that Charlie was a man who could be a servant and saw himself as a servant of the nation. And as a young guy, often served older people who would benefit more from what he was doing than he would. I admired it greatly. Now, Charlie did make some mistakes, and I want to identify what that was, not because I want to criticize him these short days since his death, but because I want us to learn, and I think that he was coming to a conclusion about these things as well. Charlie, as he defended Christianity and as he defended conservative politics, he was brilliant. He was sharp. He was always learning, always growing, always increasing his rhetorical skills. He did have a tendency to give his opinions as though they were facts in the same tone he would give more settled and assured facts. And as a result, he often crossed lines. I heard him say, for example, that when he saw a black pilot, he would wonder if the man was qualified or if the woman was qualified. Well, this is Charlie echoing some anti-DEI stuff, some anti-affirmative action stuff. He's picked up an attitude. He's reporting it with the same tone of authority that he might something from the Gospels or something from, de Tocqueville or something on the conservative side of politics. And he should have been careful about that stuff. And I know for sure he was told. And had I had time with him, I would have enjoyed him and celebrated him, but I would have told him that same thing. And I'm not trying to make myself superior to him now that he's passed. I can assure you, growing up in the military, flying a lot, first of all, if a black man or black woman has made it to senior pilot of an airliner or flying jets, they've worked hard. They probably had to work a little harder than somebody else given the suspicions against them. And the last thing I should do, the last thing that crosses my mind if I see a black or female or Asian pilot, Hispanic pilot on my Delta jet, Delta's my airline, I fly it all the time, the last thing I do is think negative. I think more positive, not because I assume that they're better than whites, don't misunderstand, but I assume they've had to overcome more to get into that captain's seat. So I'm happy. And Charlie disparaged pilots of color by saying that kind of thing. I wish he hadn't. I really do wish that he had not said those things. Also, he had a weird kind of thinking about women and going to universities. He pretty much in some talks left the impression that the only good reason a woman should go to a university is to get her MRS degree. He actually would use that phrase. Again, I'm not dancing on his grave. I'm not trying to criticize him these days after he's been shot and killed. But I think he wants us to learn from him. And there were times he expressed opinions and maybe slang attitudes, maybe things he'd even picked up in the locker room that he should have been careful about. He was so powerful and people paid so much attention to him that he should have stayed in what he knew to be sure, the surety of the Christian gospel, the assurity of conservative traditional values politics, what we know works, what we know has been written about, what we know has been verified, what we know has been proven by history, and not be cool and using conservative cigar hang kinds of phrases and slurs. I think that diminished him. And when I heard those things, that's when I backed off. I can tell you that many young people said, look, I love what he's saying about Jesus, but I mean, this crap about women, I can't hang with him. And it hurt his broader cause. And if somebody had sat him down and said, look, do you want to really hammer college-going women? Is that really your point? Or would you rather call people to Jesus and encourage people towards a more conservative politic? He would have said the latter, and he would have dropped off the former. And I wish there'd been some good people around him saying those things. Maybe there were, but I don't know it. And I will tell you where I think he was very, very courageous. By the way, at the end, he was losing support. I heard from people who were talking about backing off from Charlie Kirk because he was losing support over these issues. And I think he was right on these issues. I think he was right to call for an open airing of all the records related to Epstein. Now, Epstein was barely even on my radar screen when all of this came up, and it seemed to be a distraction from other things. But if we've had major people in government embroiled in sex rings involving minor women or minor sex partners, minors in general, if we've had some kind of secret sex cult going on in the high levels of government, if Epstein was doing that kind of stuff, if he was, then yeah, those records should be made open. And if it indicts some people who are currently in government who are prominent in our society, tough. Now, I don't know any of that to be true. I don't know anything about the Epstein records, but the idea of openness in our society, the best antiseptic is sunlight. The best thing to cleanse is sunlight. Let's lance this boil. Why is anybody sealing those records? We've gone through all this crap for so many years on the JFK assassination records, and the more that's released, the more people go, well, we already know all this. It's no big deal. Why was it being held? Why do we have this big mystery going on? Open the records. Let's get it out. And if somebody in the presidency or some former president and his wife or anyone else gets smeared, tough. That's what it means to live in a democracy or a republic. I think we live in a republic, and to have an open society. So I admire him about that. I think he's right. He was raising some questions about Israel. I am as radically pro-Israel as you can be, but that doesn't mean the way the government is conducting its domination of Gaza is always moral and right. I'm a Christian. I believe in the just war theory. I believe your response to a provocation has to be proportional. I believe you have to be compassionate towards civilians. That's clearly not going on. We should be holding a line. We should be holding Mr. Netanyahu's feet to the fire. You're not anti-Israel. You're certainly not anti-Semitic if you call for a moral and just conduct of war. And he was moving that way and was interesting. And I find another thing interesting too, and it shows his intellectual openness. There's pretty good indication that he was moving towards Catholicism. He was raised as a Presbyterian, spoke out as a Protestant. But maybe under the influence of some people like Candace Owen and other prominent Catholics who were in his life, he was beginning to make positive statements about some Catholic doctrine. Now, some of what I'm saying is supposition. I'm telling you straight up, I don't know firsthand. He and I were not sitting over steak talking about any of this. But I admire him. I want us to learn from him. I want us to see that he was a man. I want us to see that he was courageous. I want us to see that he stood by his God and his faith, and he went into dangerous and difficult and insulting places. And at the age of 31, think about what you were doing at the age of 31 if you're past that. At the age of 31, he was one of our strongest national voices for Christianity and for a traditional values conservative kind of politic. He's to be admired. He's to be appreciated. Not everything he said was right. He shouldn't be worshipped. He's not going to be, he's not on the pantheon of American greats in that sense. Nobody's trying to compare him to Washington. But the fact that he was an outspoken voice and he was assassinated, and there may be some low-level bumbling conspiracy to bring that about, it's something we should pay attention to. But most of all, I love the Jewish blessing. I love the Jewish blessing that says, may a certain departed person's memory be a blessing. So may Charlie Kirk's memory be a blessing. May he inspire in all of us courage and learning and passion and servanthood. May he inspire a courageous willingness to go where the facts lead him and call for openness and even challenge those who are his supporters. May we admit our mistakes, pursue what we know to be true, do it boldly in our generation. And as I live the rest of my life, decades more I trust, to do the good I'm called to do, I'm going to be inspired by my casual, a few minutes meeting friend, Charlie Kirk. I'm going to learn from his mistakes. I'm going to learn from his gifts. I'm going to light a lamp at the torch of his courage and passion and servanthood, and I'm going to be a better man for him having lived. Do the same. And let's bless Charlie Kirk, forgive him for his mistakes, and extend the good that is there to extend.
Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, and a frequent faith and culture commentator in international media. His groundbreaking books on faith and society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search for God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and Lincoln's Battle with God. Learn more at stephenmansfield.tv.